Welcome to the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe with Streamline Capital. Very excited for today's show. We've got none other than Jim Pfeifer on the line with us. So, Jim, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Excited.
Awesome. Now, for people listening, brought Jim on for a couple of reasons. He has a podcast of his own and, runs Passive Pockets, investment platform as well. We'll eventually get into that. But Jim, start us out by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got into, real estate investing in general.
Yeah, I'm kind of on career number 6. I won't take you through the full journey, but coming out of college, I was a finance major and I was always really interested in building wealth.
Hmm.
And I was really confident that the best way to do that, of course, was the stock market, buying stocks and mutual funds. And there's no other way to do that. So as soon as I got my first real job, I think the first thing I asked is when can I start putting money into my 401k? And I was off and running. And that was the first 15, 20 years of my career. I had a couple different jobs, became a high school teacher, and then eventually we had another kid, and grew out of our house. We bought a new house and couldn't sell our old house.
Hmm.
And I became an accidental landlord. That's how I got into real estate. And at that time also, after I kind of had that house for a while, I did not like being a landlord. I didn't like it at all, but I saw what it was doing financially, which I did like. And so eventually I bought a couple more properties, and then I became a financial advisor. And when I was a financial advisor, they act like you know nothing about finance, and they retrain you. And as they were retraining me about how to do these paper assets, I realized I had everything that they were teaching me applied better to the real assets, my real estate portfolio. And I kind of got to the point where I realized I think that paper assets are speculation, because you buy a stock and then you hold it with no current benefit, and you hope at some point to sell it to somebody else for more, right? That's it. And with real estate, you buy it and it has current benefit with cash flow, hopefully. And then, the gravy on top is you get appreciation at the end. Yeah, as I was becoming a financial advisor, I was also realizing that I was more real estate guy than paper asset guy. And so I didn't last long as a financial advisor. I eventually transitioned to become a full-time active real estate investor, which at the time I thought was passive. I was buying turnkey single families. I bought some small multis, which ended up, the first one was a 22 unit, which was a little bit bigger than I wanted. I was a terrible asset manager, but the thing is, I thought I was passive because I had a property manager, and I was passively telling him every day, don't evict this person, or, don't spend so much on the rehab and all that. And it was terrible. Nothing cash flowed like I projected,
Hmm.
but it all appreciated because the market timing, not on purpose, was great. Everything was going up, right? That was in the 20 teens and all that. And, so I did that for a few years before I realized this isn't really me. And then I stumbled into something called syndications. And
Hmm.
when I found syndications, I was like, yes, this is me. Because I think if you're going to be an active real estate investor, you have to have some kind of advantage, whether you can swing a hammer better than the next person, or a market or a strategy deeper than anyone. I didn't have any of that. But I understood, or I learned how to find trusted partners and to evaluate deals and give my money to someone else to invest and manage. And so I became a full-time investor in real estate syndications,
Hmm.
accidentally started a group called Left Field Investors. It was really
Okay.
just supposed to be a mastermind, 12 people in Columbus, Ohio, where I live. We were going to meet once a month and go out to dinner and talk about syndication investing, because it's hard to find people that are interested in syndication investing. First meeting was supposed to be March 18th, 2020. And that
Okay.
was when the
Yes.
pandemic
Yep.
shut everything down, right? So
Hmm.
we went online, community grew, we became Left Field Investors, and we developed a lot of resources for LPs, and then we eventually brought on general partners and operators onto the platform to kind of meet in the middle, right? We had LPs and they had deals, and so everybody met, and it was great. And so we did that for about 4 years before we realized that the resources we had were not enough to do all the things that we wanted to do to support the community. And that's when we partnered with Bigger Pockets. And now we are Passive Pockets, a community of 1,000 LPs who kind of just work together to
Yeah.
create financial freedom for our families.
Yeah. I love the progression. And to be honest, I eventually want to be 100% passive investor. I'm
Yeah.
not there yet, but that's the goal, is to be 100. I think that's most people's goal, is to be 100% passive. So you talk about, kind of, And I'm putting words in your mouth here, kind of waking up and realizing that you were actively investing and not passively investing. With the portfolio you had, and you said you weren't a good manager, was that already producing enough income for you, or where were you in that spot when you decided to start that passive investors as far as how much real estate you own, how much time you were putting in, and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so I had, capital from just, I worked hard at different jobs, saved money and put it all in the stock market in different places. So really when I bought real estate, it was just liquidating my stock portfolio and mutual funds and things like that. And, I think I was really lucky at timing the market, right? I timed it perfectly on accident. I was buying
True.
properties from or turning them into rentals from I
Yep.
think the first one was maybe 2013, 14, and all the way through
Yep.
I think I sold them all in 2019, but a lot of them, they just
Hmm.
doubled, tripled in value through nothing that I did, right? It was just that was the market we were in. So it just kind of turned into something. And that's where I got the capital then to be able to go full time into syndications. And, I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning as a, syndication investor and slowly used my community. And I'm a big believer in community. I think for LPs, being part of a community is essential to success in investing because, as you know, these are long term investments that are completely out of the control of the LP, right? You guys decide when to sell, not us. So there's a lot of things that complicate that for LPs. So that's why we built a community kind of to support the LPs and help them.
Okay. So let's talk about that community. You mentioned left field investors started, right as COVID locked things down. So, kind of grew as a virtual meetup first. Tell me about how that kind of grew, when you put actual stuff into place and basically the progression to where it is now.
Yeah, well, the first thing we did is we named it, right? And we called it Columbus Passive Investing Group, CPIG. Not the best name, but again, it was just going to be a local meetup. And we spent the first year really, I was trying to discourage people from joining because I was still thinking of it as a meetup and not as a community. But
Hmm.
the nice thing, if there is any nice thing about the pandemic, is we were all stuck at home. So, we did monthly meetings online on this new technology called Zoom, which no one had heard of before, right? And
Hmm.
we got some really great guests, operators and industry people who came on because no one had anything to do. So they didn't mind coming on a Zoom call with 20 people, right?
Hmm.
And so that's kind of how we started. We were just really doing Zoom meetings. And then slowly we started writing blog articles. Then we got a website and we decided to change the name to something more palatable. We became Left Field Investors. And that's when it just kind of took off because our community was growing. We'd have operators come in and partner with us on providing content, talking about an asset class or things like that. And so it just really grew quickly and we kept coming up with new resources. And then we really realized that, it's hard running a community because the LPs, they don't want to pay much to join the community, right? Because they're not sure about it and all that. And then if you get all your money from GPs, then you're biased. So it was a real fine line to walk. But what we finally realized is we started a podcast and operators would come on and advertise on the podcast and we could generate revenue there. And also, operators had deals, right? And what do they want to do with the deals? They want to get them in front of LPs. So pretty soon we had 500 LPs. So then we started having operators come on and present deals to our community, and we would charge them for that. And then we realized, these operators would partner with us and just have their name on our website and be a preferred partner. And then we would talk about them and they'd pay us monthly for that. So we kind of had revenue coming from both ways. But the problem was we didn't start it as a business, right? So we were just a community, but I had people working and putting a lot of time in, and we just weren't paying people it
Hmm.
was. It was a labor of love for all of us. And so
Yeah.
the revenue coming in was just to, upgrade the website and do all of that. And we didn't get to the point until the end where we could pay our people that were working for us a little bit at least. And so that was always the struggle.
Yeah, interesting, interesting. Now, as far as price point, you guys are pretty reasonable on your price point. I think I mentioned this to you prior to, but I've been doing a lot of research on different places where we could post our deals because I am a sponsor and I am looking to put my deals in front of as many LPs as possible. But some of the questions I had, you already, you hit on the head. I want to be able to put my deals in front of as many investors as possible. And you mentioned this for LPs. LPs don't want to put money in unless they know they're going to get value out of it. But I think GPs are the same way. And just kind of looking at your fee structure, I've seen a lot of people with portals that are charging a lot more. So as far as your fee structure, first of all, thanks for making it reasonable. But so this juncture, let's look at like the passive investors. What do you think most passive investors are looking for when they come to a group like Passive Pockets?
They're looking for confidence. They're looking for confirmation
Hmm.
because it is a really scary world, right? In a stock, you buy it, you sell it. Everyone's heard of stocks.
Hmm.
Almost everyone has a 401k, so it's super familiar. But alternatives, a lot of these have to be hidden. You can't go advertise them, right? There's all kinds of regulations around that. And then when you invest, you have to send a wire, which most
Hmm.
people only send a wire when they're buying a house, right? It's terrifying. And then you have a realtor to kind of help you and make sure you have the numbers right and all that.
Hmm.
So it's really a scary experience. And then you're giving someone money that you might have talked to once for 30 minutes, right? You don't know them. And you're giving them money for a long time, right? They're
Hmm.
illiquid investments out of your control. And so it's just a really scary experience. So what they're coming to from the community is confidence
Hmm.
and confirmation that, hey, I'm investing with ABC operator. Someone else has invested before. Yes, we know these people. When you send the wire, we can tell you, hey, it's going to get there, right? There's going to be someone on the other end. And then just to understand how things work and go forward. Because the thing is, you can make a lot of money investing this way. And one of the ways you do that is, there's such tax benefits, but also these, real estate is generally pretty profitable, right? But it's hard to take that first step because it's so scary. And, recently we've had a lot of, there's some bad actors out there. And so you've had people that have walked off with money. Maybe they were on the right track to start with, but something happened and then they weren't. So it's a really scary place for LPs, and a community just gives people security.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. We've been doing a lot of ads recently, and that's everything you listed are things that I've heard in just kind of like the last week. It's like
Yeah,
we've had one 30-minute call. Are we comfortable enough for people to invest? Usually the answer is no, and
right.
there's a lot of due diligence that passive investors should be doing, but at a minimum, they have to feel comfortable with the sponsor. They have to feel comfortable with the deal. They're going to wire a penny at all. So.
Right. And when we started doing deal webinars, we had some great success, at Left Field Investors, now Passive Pockets, where our LPs would contribute millions of dollars to these deals, right? And so then, of course, that attracts other operators who hear about it. And so we would have a new operator that no one in our community knew. And they would come on and we would say, okay, and they'd say, hey, I want to do a deal webinar. And I would say, look, you can do a deal webinar, but you're not going to get any investors
Mhm.
because no one knows you. And no, I have this great deal. Once they see the deal, it's a great deal. And I would say, it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
It's like, you got to take us out to dinner first. And that's getting to know the LPs. And so and I'd say, if you want to pay us money for it, that's fine. You can do your deal webinar, but you're not raising anything. And they would
Mhm.
come on and they would present their deal, and they still could not understand why no one would invest with them. Where the next guy that comes along has a deal that's maybe not as good and the pro forma doesn't look as good, and they would raise $5 million from our community or whatever. But it's because they had done the work beforehand. They'd gotten to know some of the LPs. And you don't have to get to know everyone in the community, but
Yeah.
if you have 4 or 5 people in the community who are posting, hey, this operator's great. And so it takes some time. You got to get to know them. So we gave them opportunities. We had different kind of webinars. You could come in and just do a lunch and learn where you would just provide content. Here's a multifamily operator would come in and talk about multifamily. Give people time to see your expertise, to understand you, to get to know you a little bit better, to ask you a few questions. And it really made a difference. Those that, spent the time to get to know the community, come to our events, interact in the forums where you can kind of build relationships, had success. And those that just came in and said, hey, I want your money, that was a fail every time, regardless of how good the deal was.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I love hearing that because that it does reinforce a lot of my thought patterns. I mean, I've been looking at, like I said, lots of different portals. I think Passive Pockets is probably the premier out of all of them. But I was thinking about presenting in portals like this, but that's exactly what I was thinking is if I go into somebody else's portal and present, at best, I might make a couple of contacts, that maybe down the road invest. Like you said, I don't think going into a cold audience like this, cold meaning they don't know you, a cold
Right.
audience like this is going to generate a lot of investments. But have you seen it start relationships? Just like the cold presentation. I know you said people who are participating in the portal, that does, but just one presentation, is that worthwhile doing if, if you don't have a relationship in there?
I think it's all of the above,
Mhm.
right? If you start coming to events where Passive Pockets people are at, right? And you start interacting with them and you maybe give some content or, do a webinar or write a blog or something just to kind of get your name out there. And then with us, you can join as a member, and there's two forums. One is for everybody and one is just for LPs, because we found that, LPs will speak more freely if they don't think the GP is listening to them, whether they're saying something nice, bad, or indifferent. We have found that at first we opened it up and anyone could join the forum. And so we'd have operators, and every time an operator posted something, that post shriveled and died, right?
Mhm.
Unless they were just adding value. And so I think if you come onto the forum and you just add value, like someone has a question, you answer it, and then you start getting to know a few people in the community who then recommend you. That's the whole thing. It's really hard because operators are like, how do I get into your community and make it work?
Mhm.
I don't know. I know that there's operators that are really popular within our community, but they've been there for a long time.
Yeah.
And so it's just the everyday grind of interacting with people in the community. And then now also there's a responsibility of our community members, right? If they invest with you and like you, then they need to spread the word. And so we
Mhm.
also have reviews on our website where you can give people, operators 5 stars, like a Yelp. And there's all kinds of things like that. So it's just getting the word out and just being consistent and realizing that it's going to take a while to build a relationship with the community. You're not going to come in day one and boom, it's done. It might take a year or
Mhm.
two. But then as an operator, is that worth it when you're maybe going to raise 3, 4, 5, $10 million on the platform? That's for you guys to decide. But it's about building relationships, and the community helps you build a bunch at once, but you got to start slow.
Yeah. And honestly, I think that is true for individual investors as well. I mean,
Yeah.
it is very rare. It has happened for me, but it is very rare that somebody, you meet on LinkedIn or you meet somewhere, you get on one phone call and they're wiring money 2 days later. All right. That's
Right.
very rare. And going back to that, and in that situation, it's usually they know you because of a podcast. They know you because of, there's something else that has kind of bridged that trust gap because when it has happened to me, it's been, hey, I've been listening to your podcast for a long time, or I've been
Right.
following you on LinkedIn for a long time. But I think in the case of most individual investors, it's exactly like you say. It takes time to build that trust before they're willing to invest. And so,
Right. I think the way a community helps that, like ours, is instead of going out and trying to find that one or waiting for that one or two people to come to you, with
mhm,
a community, you can, start interacting and you're reaching a lot more people at once. And
yeah,
then once you have a couple investors in the community, it really just accelerates everything, right? So I think, or even I've said to operators, if you tell a few of your members about our community, right? Then a few of your investors about our community, then all this, and they join and maybe they like it. Now you have spokespeople in our community that have invested with you, right?
mhm,
And one of the first things they're going to do when they join the community is say, hey, has everyone heard of ABC Operator? And
mhm,
maybe a couple people have. And if they haven't, they'll say, the new person will say, oh, yeah, I invested with them. And here's what I got out of it. So I think it's kind of a two-way street, right? The community ends up sending people to you, but you can also send people to the community to kind of allow them, to help. It helps with their investing journey, so they'll thank you for it. But it also puts some people inside who know you. And so when then you start coming around, they can then vouch for you.
yeah, yeah. I love it. I love it. One question I had, I'm going back a little bit. You say you have the sponsor side and you have the investor side. How do you keep sponsors out of the investor side? Because the reality is, I've gone to events that are supposedly for passive investors. And for those listening, I used air quotes on that one, and you show up and it's like there's a bunch of sponsors in the room who I guess are posing as passive investors. I mean, how do you guys police that, or do you even police it?
Yeah, it's a tough one because we've made it clear when you sign up, you say either I'm a LP investor or I'm someone that is affiliated with an operator in any way, and then we put you in a different category, and we just kind of trust that people will be honest, and then when they aren't, usually it's they get on there, they act, they say they're an investor, and then they pitch a deal, right, and then it's easy. We're like, okay, you're in the wrong side. We click a button, you go over to the other side, we delete your post, and that's about it. We
Mhm.
really haven't had much problem with that. I think the one thing that we are most proud of about Passive Pockets
Mhm.
is the culture that has been built by our community members. The
Yep.
culture is everything. And so they kind of police themselves. And there's a couple of operators who, maybe don't behave appropriately all the time in the forum, or, aren't playing by the rules. And people see that and they're not interested, because if you're not going to play by the rules in a community that's built to help people, right? What
Mhm.
are you going to do when you're actually out there running a deal?
Yeah.
Right, then you're probably not going to be ethical there either. So it kind of weeds itself out. We don't police it tightly, but we find you, we boot you. Yeah.
The first time I heard of Left Field Investors was in conjunction with Best Ever Conference. I think 2 or 3 years ago, you guys did an event the day before, but I saw the same thing, and I'm a Salt Lake guy, and so showing up to a passive investor, I did see that, and I actually didn't go because I knew that I was a sponsor, and I wasn't truly a passive investor. But that said, you got for a while you guys were connected with Best Ever, maybe loosely connected, I don't know, and then you were recently purchased by Bigger Pockets. How did you
Yeah.
get connected with those groups? And I guess then the follow-on question is, how have things changed since Bigger Pockets purchased it?
Yeah. I think we try to have that abundance mindset, that it's kind maybe it's cliche now, I don't know. But, we've always encouraged our members, look, join multiple groups, find the one that, the culture of the community fits you best. And so, Best Ever has their LP community, we have ours, and
Yep.
and they were looking to increase the number of LPs that go to that conference, because it's a great conference, but it's a lot of operators, right? And what do operators want? They want LPs there. So we went there to kind of help bring a bunch of LPs, and it was a great partnership. And we didn't do this year, we went again. We didn't do the day of education, but we went again just because it's a great conference, and our members go, and it's also a great place if you're an LP to meet a bunch of operators, right? Because everyone's there.
Yep.
So that's kind of how we found them. And then Bigger Pockets, we'd always joked when we started Left Field Investors that, hey, maybe someday we can sell to Bigger Pockets, ha ha ha. Because they're a community of 3 million. And when we were starting to realize that we need a partner with resources, or we need to completely change the business model, because we'd been running for 4 years pretty hard and trying to figure out how do we keep this community going, because we felt obligations to the people in the community to make sure they had a space.
Yeah.
And we found Scott Trench, and he's the CEO of Bigger Pockets. And I had an initial meeting with him, and it was just about, hey, is there any way we can partner? Because they said they were starting Passive Pockets, right? And we weren't thinking, oh, they're a competitor. We're thinking, how do we partner with them? And
Hmm.
maybe we can work together in some ways. And, we started those talks, and pretty soon they realized, hey, we knew what we were doing, and they could
Hmm.
start Passive Pockets and make all the mistakes we made with more resources, or we could just partner up. We could use their resources, they could use our expertise, and shortcut the 4 year process. And so it
Hmm.
took us about 6 months to negotiate all the details and everything. And when they bought us, I think for some of our members, it was like when, let's say Amazon buys the local bookstore, right?
Right.
And you're like, oh my God, it's going to be terrible.
Hmm.
And I have to give Bigger Pockets credit. Scott Trench and Lindsay Buxton, who runs Passive Pockets now, they realized the strength of our community was the culture. And so they wanted to keep that culture and just, add Bigger Pockets has 3 million people. They know how to run a community,
Yeah.
right? So there's plenty they could help us with, but they recognized our expertise. And so they've let us kind of show them the way, so to speak. And they say yes more than they say no. And it's just been a great partnership. I'm always surprised when the big guy comes in, buys the little guy, and then listens to the little guy. Right? When does that happen? So it's just a great community, and partnering with them has been a big benefit to our community. There were growing pains. We made mistakes once we launched, right? But overall, it's been fantastic, and we're super happy with where we're at.
Awesome. Awesome. How has your role changed since the partnering with Bigger Pockets?
My role is significantly less. We had no resources, and we weren't really paying ourselves. So I was working all the time, 7 days a week, when on the community and all that. And now, I'm not doing nearly as much of the back end work. If there's a website issue, it's not my problem. I still do the podcast with Paul Shannon, my co-host, and then we do a lot of webinars and things like that. But we just had a meetup here in Columbus, and I was part of that. So I'm doing a lot of the content stuff, but I don't have to do a lot of the stuff that I don't like,
Hmm.
the management of the website and all of that. So
Yeah.
yeah, things have been great. And my role is just kind of public facing now.
Awesome. Awesome,
Yeah.
awesome. So you went from, basically working 24/7 for no pay to, backing up and yeah, I think that sounds awesome actually. Sounds like you
Yeah.
did the right thing. So, I've been following you guys from a distance. I mean, mainly through Paul Shannon. He's been a friend of mine for a while, and I know he said very wonderful things about you and left field investors up front, but
Yeah.
when I found it was purchased by Bigger Pockets, I was like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. That's awesome. Love it. So I've been following Bigger Pockets like most people for a long, long, long time now. But
Yeah, as have I. That's how I got started in the active business. I was,
mhm,
Googling around trying to find some information, and Bigger Pockets came up, and I was like, "What is this?"
yeah,
And the thing is, I went through Bigger Pockets, and once I wanted to do syndications, we call it graduating, right? You
yep,
graduate from Bigger Pockets, and there was nothing left, so we built it ourselves. But now, thankfully, for those that are active and want to transition to passive, you
hmm
can move off the Bigger Pockets platform right onto Passive Pockets, and
That's
it's
a
a
pot.
nice, yeah, it's a nice
Yeah.
mix there.
Like I said, one day, I hope to be completely passive in this, but I'm still probably a couple years away from that. So,
Yeah.
until then, I'll be actively involved in all of this, and eventually, be placing money with great operators. Probably some of them found on Passive Pockets. So.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a bunch there for sure.
Awesome. Well, hey, Jim, thanks for your time. With operators, I usually ask a string of questions on the end. I'm going to modify one of them. Usually I ask, what advice would you give somebody who's just starting out in the industry? So I'm going to change that around. What
Yeah.
advice would you give to somebody who is just heard about this whole passive investing idea and wants to get into it?
Well, if you're an LP, I think, again, this is going to sound self serving, but join a community. It doesn't have to be ours, but join a community because it is so hard to find knowledge and experience and people who know what they're doing in this type of investing. And so having a community is super helpful. And then if you don't mind, I know you have a lot of operators that listen. So a piece of advice to operators from the LP perspective is when people ask me what's the most important thing,
Mm-hmm.
obviously it's the operator, but the most important thing about an operator is their communication.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is because these are long term, as we said, illiquid, out of my control, all of that. And so once I send you the wire, the only thing I have is your updates, which could be, quarterly or monthly written updates. It could be in the form of a distribution, or it could be I just call or email or text you.
Yeah.
And if you don't communicate well, I get nervous. It doesn't even matter if the deal's doing great or poorly. If
Mm-hmm.
you have the best deal ever and never talk to me and I'm nervous the whole time and return all my money and, give me a 3x,
Yeah.
I'm not investing with you again. But if it was a deal that maybe didn't go
Mm-hmm.
as planned, but you were communicating the whole way and telling me how things were going, and when I called you, you answered the phone, I'm probably going to invest with you again. So it's not all results, it's the communication and treating your LPs with respect. That's what gets me coming back.
Yeah. And I appreciate you saying this. I made a mistake once. So I did start a fund and I started raising money for other operators like a lot of people do. And I had one deal that started going south. We eventually lost money on that deal, but a lot of operators, I think this is very common in the industry is, when things are going good, operators are very happy to put out the monthly reports. But when things start going bad, the monthly reports turn into quarterly reports and turn into. But I had gone several months without getting a report from the lead sponsor. And the mistake I made is I didn't say anything to my investors. And then
Yeah.
I had one investor who was, started blowing up my phone one week. And I decided, you know what? I'm just going to tell the truth, you know, and worked up an email and said, hey guys, you know what? I haven't, I made the mistake. I haven't communicated with you guys because I had nothing to communicate. The lead sponsors aren't communicating with me. And what shocked me is how well received that communication was. I mean, I don't know, it shouldn't have shocked me, but it did. How well received that was. It's like, hey, Brian, thank you for I think almost, I've had more people respond to that communication than I've had to the good news stories. Hey, you're getting a distribution this week. But
Yeah. That's
uh,
funny. This similar thing, we're talking about Paul Shannon. He also runs InvestWise Collective, and they had a debt fund they were doing, and the operator just wasn't giving them the updates they wanted, and there was another little issue they were having, and so they had uncertainty, but the deal was way outperforming pro forma, And
Yeah.
Paul and InvestWise Collective, they decided to liquidate take all that capital and give it back to investors and say, yeah, this is performing, but we're uncertain because the other operator isn't communicating like they promised.
Yeah.
And how hard is that, right? And so that just impressed, and we had to talk about it on the Passive Pockets forum, and everyone was chiming in like, that's, yeah, I'm disappointed that I'm not getting that return, but you know what? I'm getting my capital back, and if something happens on that fund because people aren't getting information, I'm not going to lose money. And they were all really supportive of the decision InvestWise made. So just another anecdote. If you communicate efficiently, even if it's bad stuff, people will appreciate it because we're
Yeah.
going to find out eventually, right? I mean,
Yeah.
might as well tell
And,
us when you
and to
know.
that point, if you stop communicating, that does bring risk in, and that's probably why Paul made that decision,
Yeah,
is there is risk there because even though they're still putting out funds, how much longer is that going to happen? If they're not telling us what's going on, how do we know that we're going to continue to receive that same level of distributions just because
exactly.
the lack of communication introduces more risk. And I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah, that's a hard decision to make. In my case, it was equity invested into a real estate asset, so pulling out wasn't even an option. But
Right,
man,
right.
at that option. Whew. Anyway, all right. Well, hey, thanks for coming on the show. I think we hit the major question that I ask everybody, and then the last question is, how can listeners learn more about you?
The easiest way to do it, just go to PassivePockets.com. I'm there. If someone wants to reach out directly, my email is jimpfeifer@biggerpockets.com, and you're welcome to reach out to me directly. If usually I say LPs, I talk to LPs all the time. If operators are interested in engaging with the Passive Pockets community, they can send me an email, and I can forward that on to the appropriate people to kind of get you hooked up and get all the info to become an operator member of the community.
All right, sounds good. And we'll put his email in the show notes. And the Pfeiffer is spelled a little bit different. It has a silent F,
That's right.
silent P. So we'll put that in the show notes so that you can just look at that, click, and you don't have to worry about spelling it wrong. So, Jim, thanks so much for coming on the show. We'll also put a link to Passive Pockets. I don't know if I think you mentioned that. We'll put a link to the Passive Pockets in the show notes as well.
Perfect.
And my understanding is you can, if you're a sponsor or an investor, you can sign up directly from the website as well, correct?
Yep, I think you can. Yeah.
Okay, sweet. So put that in the show notes as well. So anybody listening, if you want to reach out to Jim, his email will be in there. If you want to learn more about Passive Pockets or Bigger Pockets, those links are going to be in the show notes as well. All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.